Well, nowadays the idea of digital delivery is commonplace, with marketplaces like Steam and GOG controlling the lion's share of computer game distribution. You would think that the 80s would be dominated by physical media exclusively, and that digital delivery wouldn't even be attempted, given the limitations of hardware that was available at the time. But from the early 1980s to the mid-1990s, there was an exception to this. When a long-standing company in Japan that started out by selling sewing machines jumped into the gaming market by making a highly unique vending machine, an incredible creation that would work with early online systems and utilize rewritable components as an alternative to the traditional store experience. A piece of hardware that never did quite as well as its makers intended it to. It nevertheless did all sorts of things that are now commonplace in the modern world. It provided a way of selling software without boxes or manuals. It existed as a marketplace for hard-to-obtain indie titles. And it was also a method for selling add-ons and custom levels for existing games. With a cult following, and multiple CD-ROMs, floppies, magazines, and press releases, it would still never entirely be mainstream. But its interior components and general design ideas would live on in an unexpected successor, despite a sudden and extremely quick removal from stores in 1997. This is the story of software vendor Takesan, much more commonly known as Takeru. Well, over in the United States in the 1980s, multiple factors including lack of consumer confidence and lack of third-party vendors were causing the event that would come to be known as the game crash of 1983. The games industry in Japan, fundamentally tied to personal computing, had begun to pick up speed, as hobbyist clubs turned into retail stores, and those retail stores were turning into larger companies. While all of this was happening, Brother Industries, a longtime electrical parts company, was trying to enter into that new market. Brother Industries started out as Yasui Sewing Machine Company in Nagoya, Japan, then became Yasui Sewing Machine Brothers, and eventually changed its name to just Brother, taking the name of one of its products, the Brother, a sewing machine named after Masayoshi and Jitsuichi Yasui, the inheritors of the company. But this company is most famous nowadays for computer components, notably printers. Trying to establish a hold in this growing market, they would look at the rise of computer stores across the country and would try to capitalize on it. They would initially do this by creating a store that sold both radio equipment and computer software, Comroad. But after entering into computer retail, employee Yuichi Yasutomo noticed a problem. While some of the best-selling titles would fly off the shelves, not every title in the increasing volume of releases they were receiving would do as well, and that would lead to a glut of overstock of the titles that were not selling, using up valuable shelf space. Looking at the expanding telecommunications industry, Yasutomo began to form a theory that there might be a way to sell this stock differently so that old physical titles would linger in the store. In other words, he believed that there could be a way of delivering software to the shop digitally. Not an uncommon idea nowadays, but an absolutely insane one for 1983. As large-scale projects that involved delivering data to homes and businesses were limited to teletext services from companies like NTT, Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, who designed the Captain system, a videotext system similar to France's Minitel system that was utilized for delivering text-based information to owners. Developing this sort of thing, especially this early on, was tricky and difficult. Speaking with writer Keizuki Miyazato during an interview with ASCII, done for a retrospective on the Takeru machines, one of the primary sources for this video, Yasutomo stated, "At the time, there was a lot of noise about it being a new medium, but the speed was slow and the communication charges were high, so it was not feasible to provide a service using it. I thought, it might be difficult, but I wanted to give it a try. There were other difficulties encountered when pursuing this idea. According to Brother's own histories, the main composition material of their prototype was fiberglass reinforced plastic, which unfortunately could cause a lot of internal interference and static discharge inside the prospective machine, which was not a good environment for 5¼ inch floppy disks. Additionally, since the machines were developed with NEC's hardware in mind for their user interface, Yasutomo had to meet with NEC to understand exactly how that could be realized, as well as continue to work with telecommunications companies on figuring out how to make things cost efficient. In the process of doing this, Brother would strengthen their relationship with NTT, who they actually had some previous experience working on, as they had provided some hardware for the Captain's system. At the time, NTT had recently begun privatization, and wanted to use their relationship with Brother to develop and utilize new technologies. This relationship would go on to benefit the Takeru machines later down the line, but it would still take a long while to figure out exactly how to accomplish this new method of delivery, and discussions on how to pull this off would take over 2 years. Finally, in 1985, Brother had something ready. A prototype of a vending machine for computer software called the SV2000, derived from the word software vendor and Brother's intended goal of placing 2,000 units in computer stores across the country. However, Yasutomo quickly figured out that this name was not a good or descriptive one, and the company decided to go with something more memorable. Officially known as Soft Vendor Takasan, and more colloquially and commonly known as Takeru, named after a Japanese folk hero. So how did the machines work? The closest thing you could compare it to would be an ATM. By using a screen based on PC98 architecture, the user could select the software that they wanted from a menu. The users paid in cash, and then a floppy cartridge or cassette would be dispersed, that would then have to be reinserted into a different part of the machine, which would write the software of the game onto the selected form of media. This data would be downloaded directly to the Takeru machines through a direct line. The user would also receive a simple manual for their bought software, with tickets being printed out for more complex game manuals like for RPGs. The machines didn't print labels, though. That the user had to write themselves on Takeru-branded cartridges, cassettes, and floppies. With all of the pieces in place, the first version of the Takeru machines were strategically deployed in Nagoya, Osaka, and Tokyo, at heavily utilized stores such as J&P and the famous Yodobashi camera. But while they would be well used, this deployment would run into trouble at making a profit. Because this is the early 1980s, delivery through direct lines was not fast. The whole process could take 20 minutes per title during business hours, and while that was happening, no one else could use the machine. And although this could be worked around by having the stores receive the data overnight of their most popular software, downloaded off business hours to a 20 megabit hard drive, having a dedicated 24-hour line like this on all the time for this process wasn't cheap, causing what would be about a $40,000 loss in today's money per quarter, according to Yasutomo. Because of this, for his very first revision, Yasutomo decided to install a modem and pay a subscription service instead. And with that, the machines became profitable and began to expand, with about 25 machines working across Japan in 1986, going up to about 130 in 1988. Over the first 5 years that the Takeru machines were in use, some standards and strategies would begin to develop, but there would also be some problems that impeded this. While computer software manufacturers didn't have a problem and even encouraged older ports of software to be sold through their machines, especially for older systems, the publishers had much more reluctance when it came to upcoming big titles, and selling those killer app titles remained something that just couldn't be accomplished through Takeru vending machines. Ichiro Hirasawa, the new head of the project, tried to find alternative solutions, and had a couple of ideas that would also make the machines more attractive to store owners. Older software, no matter what it was ported to, could be sold at a discount and not take up shelf space, and he would actually create a special line of Takeru software for that. Very similar conceptually to the PlayStation's greatest hits line, called Masterpiece Bunko. He explains his sales pitch and their reaction. If you put old titles in Takeru, when the customer asks the store owner if you have them, you can say, "We have them in Takeru. I was used like a handyman in that industry, and I was able to build a good relationship with the publishers and stores." Additionally, while sometimes it wasn't advantageous to sell larger games through the system due to their size, additional scenarios for existing games would work very well for the machine, and one particular game would have a very unique release strategy for the time that would greatly benefit Brother and the Takeru machines. Released in 1987, Falcom Classic Socerian was an insanely big hit in Japan. Designed by Yoshi Akiya, this entry in the Dragon Slayer series was notable for having the ability to generate, import, and play custom scenarios that were stored on separate discs for the users to play. And this clever idea kept that game a bestseller for over 2 years. Hirasawa would take advantage of this by hiring out and working with the company Amorphous, who would use the tools that Kia developed to both make and sell Socerian scenario discs. Brother, through Takeru, would also make and sell scenario discs as well. And while some of these scenarios would be developed by studios, these discs would also contain contest winners from competitions held in magazines like Comptiq. But it wasn't just Socerian. Other mods and expansion packs would show up later in Takeru machines as well, even things like Doom WAD collections. Takeru would upgrade their machines to a third model, this time with an ISDN line, one of the first available worldwide. The installation of that, a perk of Brother's close relationship with NTT and NTT's desire to work with new technology. The third generation of the machines also added a laser printer, i386 architecture, and a much larger hard drive. They would also add a CD-ROM much later on, all in the interest of increasing what systems they could sell software to, minimizing online operations, and trying to bring down the heavy cost of the machines. But the problem of software makers making their newer games available for Takeru machines persisted. Software companies found it just too much of a cost to make a separate version of their games for Takeru, and consumers at the time liked the bonuses that came with boxes and full manuals that were printed, instead of just a couple of generic laser-printed pages. Although discouraged from this, the people behind Takeru would continue to seek innovation, and the functions of the Takeru machines would branch out in interesting ways. Sometimes there would be ports that would be sold exclusively through Takeru, and one system that had a great relationship with the Takeru machines was the Sharp X68000. As a matter of fact, the X68000 port of innovative shoot-'em-up and visual novel hybrid Star Trader, a version that toned down the adventure elements and greatly overhauled the space combat, was sold exclusively through Takeru. Takeru would also venture out into software development themselves, releasing exclusive titles on the machine. For example, they would work with former Aerogate developer Silence on games in the Jewl BEM Hunter Lime series, the PC-98 ports of which all recently got a fan translation from Baba Jean Mel. Brother would also act as a publisher, and publish a range of titles to be distributed through their equipment, such as the RPG Eisen New Generation, as well as substantial support for localizations of a large amount of Western DOS ports, including one for surgery simulator Life and Death. Unfortunately, though, there would be some obstacles, competition, and confusion that they would encounter at this point. It's worth noting that one minor factor in why these machines may have failed was that there was some brand name confusion about the word Takeru that could have impacted sales. At the time, those vending machines were not the only thing around that carried the name Takeru. The game company Sur De Wave, publishers of Kokoron, were also known by that title at that time as Takeru Company Limited. This confusion only worsened when the Kokoron developers had titles in Takeru machines under their separate but identical name, notably the interesting cruise ship thriller Nostalgia 1907. So Brother ended up essentially with software in their machines with the same name as the ones they were trying to sell that had nothing to do with Brother's attempts at software distribution. Confused yet? So were consumers, and some dispute still exists online over which titles belong to Brother's Takeru publishing brand and which titles belong to Sur De Wave's Takeru alias. There would also be some competition to those machines that, due to their design choices, would be notably faster. Nintendo themselves would have vending machines that were made for selling Famicom Disk System software. And since those machines didn't have any telecommunications components at all, they worked considerably faster. Brother would continue to seek out new sources, and one of the most interesting aspects of their history was their ties to the Doujin scene in Japan. In a move incredibly ahead of its time, Hirasawa decided to, after encountering homebrew and indie software in Akihabara, go down to Comiket himself and start handing out flyers to Doujin game developers to see if they wanted to have their games sold in Takeru machines. Reports of revenue sharing deviate drastically, with some Brother employees claiming creators got 40 to 50% of the revenue, and blogs and contemporary magazines claiming about 70% of it going to creators. But whatever the case, it resulted in a lot of submissions. Hirasawa explains in that same ASCII interview. The Doujin software that was sent to me was reviewed all at once on Fridays. I prepared 2 boxes and divided them into one box that passed and one that didn't pass. Games that could not be cleared or that violate public order and morals were rejected. Only 1 out of 3 games passed. We wanted to make sure that there was nothing wrong with the Doujin software sold at Takeru, so we were very strict when looking at it. These games, roughly 100 to 150 between 1993 and 1997, would actually be collected later on and put in collection CDs, some of which have thankfully been preserved, and they can give us a sense of the range of games available and what was being developed at that time, everything from RPGs to visual novels to space shooters. Some of these programs would have creators that would go on to more notable work, such as Rin du Sabbat, an extreme content shock horror RPG, don't let the look fool you here, that was designed by the creator of the Corpse Party series, Makoto Kerouin. But being an indie collection, there wasn't much crossover with larger companies, and the collections that were on these CDs resembled something like what itch.io has today. However, some companies that got their start as Doujin sold through Takeru would get much larger later on, such as the company iMagic, whose strategy games would sell very well in the Takeru machine, and would impress Brother so much that they would later retain them for software development. Brother, through Takeru, also offered a lot of press, floppies, and CDs, guided by their flagship mascot Takapan, a fast little robot. A diskette collection called Takeru Disc World was released, and came out with about 10 volumes. And they have a lot of interesting things on them, including a list of stores in Japan designed like an old-school RPG map, with phone numbers and information on each individual store that carried Takeru machines, and a lot of categories of user submissions that had their own virtual hosts, such as one that talked about ghost stories and urban legends from local schools, as well as one that told submitted jokes. These floppies even had their own Takapon game, a very basic strategy action RPG hybrid. There were even two magazines called Takeru Press and Takeru World that served a dual function as a kind of catalog for upcoming software, as well as general promotion for the machines. Also, setting up a precedent for digital distribution and going back to their work with iMagic, they would work with that company to release Takeru at Home, a database CD for ordering directly through Brothers Takeru Division, that came out for Windows, Macintosh, and the Sharp X68000. They even had their own membership club, complete with card. Additionally, the Takeru machines would provide things like greeting cards, general-purpose clip art software, and software applications. Despite trying everything under the sun to keep the machines relevant, the incredibly fast pace of technology in the second half of the 1990s began to outpace any possible advancements that could be added to the Takeru machines. And this situation would cause Brother Industries to make a pretty surprising decision. Having never reached the initial target of 2,000 units that were set in the 1980s, peaking at about 350, and never generating the kind of revenue that Brother wanted, Brother decided that the Takeru machines were simply not successful enough to continue running, and a shutdown was ordered of every single machine in existence in February 1997. Takeru magazines and promotional materials quickly ran their final issues. The machines were dismantled and taken back. Takeru at Home became useless, and very quickly, Takeru was no more. But one aspect of these machines lived on in a surprising way. Sometime in 1994, between the second and third revisions of the Takeru machines, control of Takeru switched over to Zing, a group within Brother. And when researching possible alternate usages for the machines, it was noted that they could possibly be used for Karaoke, a system that had small files, at least on the audio side, and would greatly benefit from being able to change over songs. The reasoning for this was that the most popular karaoke merchandise at the time were laserdiscs, which, due to their storage, would have a lot of video data on them for all kinds of music videos, which would necessitate only a small amount of audio on the discs, about 70 to 80 minutes. Zing, and by extension Takeru's creators, figured that downloading MIDI files would have a much larger shelf life if they were put directly into karaoke machines, and they would implement this technology in one of their brands, Joy Sound, ensuring that the technology that was used for the Takeru machines would live on. These machines would turn much more of a profit than Takeru ever did, and Joy Sound karaoke machines are still around. Takeru was considered a failure, but a bit of a respected one, and there has been some reassessment in the last decade of the value of the machines. In 2016, there was an anniversary event held by Brother, and even Japanese television recently aired an episode of Kanda Hakuzan, This Is Our Company's Dark History, a television program about mistakes made by prominent companies about the Takeru machines. That program actually ends up turning around to a positive interpretation of what was tried. The last Takeru machine still exists as a museum piece inside Brother's own museum in Nagoya City. To put it simply, the Takeru machine was too early, but the ideas that it had echoed across future years. The digital distribution model is fundamentally the largest method of how PCs are played now, with all the good and bad that implies. And Takeru's attempts at exclusivity and deep ties to the indie community echoed trends that wouldn't start to expand worldwide until decades later. You can even see echoes of this distribution model in things like Redbox, or when Netflix gave up their mail-order DVD business to focus exclusively on streaming. The Takeru machines were another innovation, where the concept was sound, but the world just hadn't caught up yet. See you next time. Thank you all for watching, and special thanks to the users on the Patreon, especially Andro, Matt Leffler, and James B. As always, subscribing to the Patreon will give you certain benefits, and this time around it'll be a couple of extra videos. One on the Takeru figure, the folk hero that we didn't really discuss in this video, and another one taking a deeper look at that Doujin CD. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.